So Jamie, welcome. Jamie is, and I know they're kind of coming on video right now as we speak, but while they're coming on, I'll kind of let you, Jamie leads the marketing strategy at Wells Fargo, and that is really focused on driving deeper engagement and customer relationships, as well as the overall customer experience. Jamie, when I looked on LinkedIn, she's got a ton of experience across really important companies like Whirlpool, Schwab, American Express, but she's been at Wells for quite a while and really doing some cool, innovative things there. So I'm looking forward to hearing more from Jamie. In addition, I'm honored to introduce Andrew Ward, who is my boss from Ampersand, the president of Ampersand, and we've worked together for quite a while. He's been an important mentor to me and has extensive experience in the TV space, working with all kinds of brands and agencies. So welcome, Andrew and Jamie, and I'll let you guys have the floor.
Great. Well, thank you, Davina. And Jamie, thanks so much for joining the group today. A pleasure to have you and a pleasure to have an opportunity to chat here a little bit together this afternoon. I'll begin by saying I'm a loyal Wells Fargo home mortgage customer for the past, I'd say, about 10 years or so. So very much appreciate the opportunity to work with the Wells Fargo team. They've been terrific. You know, when you think about the last decade or maybe the last several years, the last 5 years, to be sure, I think Wells Fargo has faced a number of challenges in the marketplace. And as you think back about those past several years or so, give us a little bit of a flavor for some of the obstacles, challenges that you've had to face, some of the steps you've put in place as you've navigated a shifting landscape, not only for a brand, but from the industry in the financial services sector. Give us a little bit of a flavor of the last several years from your perspective before we get into some of the more near-term challenges.
Awesome. Well, I'm happy to, and thanks again. Great to be here. And as you said, it's been 5 years, and really started with the financial crisis in 2008, but Wells Fargo actually weathered that extremely well. And then we faced our own crisis, really starting in 2016. And the last 4 years have been really navigating the crisis of trust that was brought on by our sales practice scandal. And what's interesting is at the heart of this was that we really betrayed our core customer base in terms of their ability to trust that we were looking out for their best interest. And so while in some ways, the number of incidences wasn't high, it was a huge impact to our brand appropriately. And so the last 4 years have really been about how to stabilize the company, how to put in place the right changes in the organization, and start to demonstrate day by day that we are a different institution, but really the actions that are associated with building trust back. And the messaging has been in parallel with that. You never want your messaging to get out ahead of the actual actions, but really importantly, we had quite a task ahead of us in terms of the messaging. And so really over the last 4 years, it has been about doubling down on our customers, making sure that they know that we value them, that we appreciate their loyalty, as like with you. So thank you for your loyalty. And really making sure that our messaging was evolving to reflect the needs of our stakeholders. And what I think was key to this was a lot of research that we did and benchmarking before the crisis, actually. So one of my recommendations to all you marketers out there is to make sure you have in place really good pulse on your customers and how they feel, what they think in as real time as possible. And this will come back when we talk about COVID. But for us, what was critical was really understanding our customers and how they were feeling and thinking about Wells Fargo. And so we knew a year and a half into our crisis that they didn't feel like we'd even apologized enough. And so it required of us, for those of you who follow Wells, we had 3 different brand campaigns within 3 years, because each of those reflected the shifts in sentiment and the shifting needs of our customer base in hearing from us about where we were in our journey. And having that data, we literally did daily and weekly polling for much of the crisis to really understand how the news cycle was impacting perception of the brand, how our actions would land on our customers, and how we would best message that. So it was action testing, it was message testing, and then real time, we obviously did quite a bit around all of our channels, making sure that across all our channels, we were delivering consistent and impactful messaging. So it was quite a challenge as a marketer to literally real time have to kind of continue to adapt your message to the customer, which was good practice for us as we got into COVID.
Yeah. Okay. When you think about that challenge of navigating the marketplace as you had to, how did that help you? Sort of piggybacking on your last comment there, how did that help you with some of the near-term challenges that we're facing, and sort of the juxtaposition of a long-term brand strategy and the evolution of that relative to sort of shifting to more near-term thinking in light of the pandemic that we're facing, and how might that long-term, short-term dynamic manifested itself in your approach, and things such as shifting from a physical presence perhaps to a digital presence. You used the phrase, I think previously, about being more personalized and more customer-centric. Give us a little bit of a flavor of how the 5 years prepped you for the last several months in light of the dynamic that we're faced with today.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think the single most important thing was out of the last 5 years was being very, very clear about who we are as a company and what our relationship with our customers is predicated on, whether you call that purpose or vision or mission, but really knowing who we are and what we needed to deliver on. Because as we got into COVID, to your point, this cycle turned into real time, right? So real time, not only was the global pandemic spreading, but domestically, but then within our industry, right, financial services. And to your point, for Wells Fargo specifically, our customers were very quickly experiencing tremendous financial shock, right? So whether it was a loss of a job or whether it was just a change in their ability to generate income or their family situation, their medical costs, all of those had a financial component to them. And so our job became literally every single day, as much as possible, to be there for our customers. And, you know, we serve 1 out of 3 households in America. So when you have that many customers, when you have 80 million customers, how do you customize as much as possible to each individual, which of course, real time is pretty impossible, but how do you tailor your messages in the moment through all the different channels to reach those individuals? And so what we found was the importance of being as close to real time as possible across all of our channels, making sure that we were consistent, but also leveraging channels for different messages at different times, responding to the volatility as much as possible. So when there was an impact in the marketplace, that we were there to reassure. And then really importantly, there was a very immediate shift to being more local, right? Think about how things were happening locally. So we were, with the very first case of employee of ours who contracted COVID, we had to send emails to all of our customers in that area overnight. And that repeated itself multiple times. And so the ability to be both reactive, but also proactive, we kind of shifted to our front foot probably a week or two into it, where we realized this was a long haul, to your point, that every interaction we had was actually going to accrue to the brand. And so we kind of took that brand promise that we had cemented over the last 4 or 5 years, and then literally applied that to every action that we took and said, okay, is this going to help us? Are we adding to our story or not? And what was really interesting is a great example of that is PPP, which was the payment protection program that the government rolled out. Wells had a huge responsibility to small businesses to be there for them in providing access to the program. But that program was changing hourly, daily, weekly. And so our ability to get to customers quickly, let them know what was happening, be very transparent, let them know what we could control and what we couldn't control became really important, because they needed to trust that we were there for them. And if they didn't hear from us for a day or two, we needed to tell them why, right? Which is, here's where your application is, and you'll hear from us in 2 to 3 days. So managing expectations. Again, email, huge reliance on social media. Again, something that we learned through our own crisis was the importance of social media. We learned that probably the painful way, right? Being on the receiving end of it. With COVID, I think we flipped the table and on the proactive side of it, where we were actually using our social media to really get to our customers really quickly with the information that they needed. So really helpful to be grounded in the long term, as you said, but to be able to tack very quickly right? Day by day, we had literally a daily stand-up call every day to align on messaging channels across all of our businesses who all had very diverse messaging needs. So it was kind of like being on a SWAT team, right? It was very, very tactical, but it felt good because we were grounded in some of the principles that we learned.
Well, there were a couple of threads in there that you mentioned that I'd like to sort of piggyback on a little bit. You talked about customer information driving your decision making and insights, and this interesting dynamic that you're a massive national brand, as you say, serving 1 of 3 homes and 80 million customers, yet the need to be personalized and localized in your messaging. So as you think about that dynamic and the role of data as you think about information, speak to us a little bit about the sort of evolution that's occurred. And I'm coming at the conversation from the TV ecosystem, and the TV ecosystem largely rooted, when we think about robust data, it's adults 25 to 54. That's not exactly what we think of the future of TV investment will be predicated on. Broad age, gender, audience definitions. It's going to be using much more robust audience insights to drive campaign planning and activation. Speak a little bit to, in this need to be more precise in your messaging and more dynamic, this evolution of data as a sort of center within the business practice center within the organization. Speak a little bit to that evolution, both over the last 5 years and perhaps more intensely over the last several months as you think about standing up your own DMP practice within the organization. How might that impact your relationship with agencies and media vendors? Give it a little bit of a perspective in that vein.
Yeah, it's a great question. And as you would expect, it's introduced tremendous complexity because we, as you would know, have significant amounts of first-party data. And obviously, along with that come strong concerns around privacy and security and probably an outsized obligation really to protect and own that data, right? More so than probably many other industries other maybe than healthcare. And so because of that, we did, as you mentioned, build and bring in-house our own DMP. And that we have been actively developing subject matter experts within our organization that really are the audience experts. And so what that's enabled us to do is have them then work with our advertisers and our third parties, right, to start to help inform them and get more, to your point, to more audience specific activities. And so what's interesting is we've even had some of our agencies, we've been able to give them access to some of our tools so that they can actually be right along with us in this journey, right? But it does have to put Wells Fargo at the center of it. I mean, we've really had to take that on in terms of being kind of the quarterback, if you will, but obviously our media agency, arm in arm, as well as all of our agencies. But it has really required a big shift. And as you talked about TV, you know, for us, TV, and I think we really use it interchangeably as video because so much of that content, right, is deployed not only through traditional linear, but also through addressable and then through other digital assets. Is increasingly going to addressable. So for us, you know, the more addressable, obviously, the better. But with addressable comes more cost and more complexity, and the need to also customize creative. And so it's all a balance, right? And as you talked about, you know, we have so much data, but when is a mass broad message, right, through linear okay and appropriate? And when is addressable appropriate? Because that does come with more complexity and more cost, but also more upside. And so that marriage is, I'd say, 50-50 art and science right now, but has really changed the way we operate. Because again, we think about all of them have a role, by the way. I mean, Wells Fargo is a big company, very diverse set of customers, right? And we think of linear TV a little bit more as a mass instrument, right? As much as possible. I think there's been huge changes in that, obviously. But as you know, as a homeowner, like a great of a very compelling sweet spot for us where if we can identify homeowners either that are existing homeowners and exclude them or non-homeowners to include them and then customize the creative accordingly, it's a very high return on investment for us because a mortgage is such a large purchase. And so when it's appropriate, addressable is very clearly our first choice, but it's not always. And so having that mix is really critical.
Yeah. When you think about that dynamic of casting a wide net in concert with delivering targeted messaging, how do you think about, and I say it from a consumer standpoint, where I'll see massive I'll experience massive wear out in terms of frequency. And as you start to think about frequency management and beginning to think about navigating that in a multi-screen environment, because I agree with you that TV is not a monolithic environment. It's not linear TV. It's sort of linear and streaming, and that may be VOD, OTT, CTV, all video. How do you start to get your brain wrapped around the idea of managing frequency against target audiences in a multi-screen environment? Or I'm sure everybody is grappling with that, and I know there's not a single silver bullet at the moment, but I'd be curious how you think about that. Do you look at it by channel? Do you look at it agnostically across all video sources? How do you begin to?
Yeah, we really plan across all. We found that taking it holistically is actually, because you want it at the customer level, right? So we're on a journey to move from product marketing to customer marketing. And there's times when product marketing is appropriate and that's the right approach. But increasingly, because to your exact point, we really are dealing with our customer across many different devices and many different channels, that our ability to try to holistically plan is critical. So we pull in our agencies and the audience management way at the front end of this to talk about the audience first, and then to plan the channels accordingly. And so what's helpful about that is as we're able to do that, and again, it's incredibly complex, but then when we're creating our assets and our creative, we've got that in mind also. And so we're a lot more, I think, judicious about our investment in our creative because we're planning accordingly. And so great example, we are right now in the market something called the Drive Up Food Bank, where we're providing actually 50 million meals through Feeding America to individuals who literally drive up to a Wells Fargo property to receive food. And it's open to anybody, open to the public. It'll be in 25 markets across the country. And so there's been a real combination of, I mean, we are definitely using TV and video, but it's all video, all TV across all different channels, often with different creative executions, as well as other tradition. We have out of home. We have, we've got a whole mix of different media, but we planned it very much around different audiences and then the geography. And it's also enabled us to be much more tailored to local markets, right? So great example of being able to audience plan for that, doing it holistically. Now it's easier because it was one campaign. It's a little harder, to your point, when you get into all of the ins and outs of our day-to-day marketing against about 80 million people, right? How do you day-to-day do that? So I'd say I feel good about where we are in the journey, but it's a journey. And, the ability to do multi-touch attribution, right, is not as advanced as we'd like. And so it's getting the data that we can get and the measurement that we can get and making the best decisions.
Yeah. You talked a little bit about, as you think about an agnostic multi-screen video solution and strategy, I'm reminded of, I think it was Frank Lloyd Wright that said form follows function, that how you design something is supposed to be in the context of what you're trying to accomplish. And it's fun. You talk about addressable, and we'll often talk to marketers and they'll have this incredibly robust and narrowly defined target audience with any number of first-party and third-party data sets. And then you'll turn to the creative and they'll say, well, the spot's really built for women 18 to 49. And this intersection of mapping creative to target audience. And I used to be on the agency side, and media was oftentimes the last part of the client presentation. You say, oh, we go through all this stuff. And then you're like, oh yeah, how are you going to spend it all? In many ways, media almost has to become primary, and in many ways it almost flips.
Yeah.
And as you think about that, not only in an addressable environment, but in a digital environment and a social environment, talk a little bit about how your creative strategy has necessarily evolved from sort of a monolithic message in all media to more customized and personalized in this environment.
It's an awesome example. I completely agree with you, by the way, in terms of flipping that order. And it's funny you say that because we've had those conversations over the last number of years with obviously all of our agency partners who are always all at the table with us. But to your point, we've increasingly been asking to be more media-led. And partnership-led, right? And so, great example is we had some great partnerships with the NBA as an example. And by definition, that advertising and that programming is very real time. And so therefore has to be much more personalized and customized to that audience in that moment. And it's completely changed the way we've thought about the creative process, right? Whereas normally we'd start with, okay, what's the main message? And we'll produce a 30-second spot, right? This has been the exact opposite, which is if our primary mode of communication is going to be through the a challenge anyway, but also through social media, right? Like each platform now has its own creative associated with it. So it really has changed. It's my point though, which is why this increasing complexity, you have to be very thoughtful about when is it worth it and when is it not? And that's where the measurement becomes so critical, because what we have found is there are times when we over engineer, right? And we've created so much complexity, so many creative versions against so many channels that the return on investment isn't there. So when is it appropriate to take your more traditional approach and kind of mass is okay versus when is it necessary, critical, and a high enough return on investment to optimize by channel, by creative asset, and by audience?
Sort of implicit in that dynamic, as you described, Jamie, is this notion of measurement and how we think about performance measurement, brand outcomes. And you mentioned, I think previously, this idea of multi-touch attribution. And in many ways, multi-touch attribution has been primarily focused in the digital space and sort of last touch, I can point to a click. And, I think there's a growing recognition that people aren't born with search wellsfargo.com as part of their genetic code. It's built by the brand building power of other media, including television and others. Speak a little bit about your measurement strategy, shifting from data to measurement and thinking about brand outcomes, whether those outcomes are more top of the funnel looking, i.e. sort of awareness, intent, likability, that sort of trust, as you said at the outset, and sort of working its way down the funnel to sort of engagement and then ultimately to sales outcome. Perhaps speak a little bit to the evolution of your measurement strategy, not just the data, but the measurement strategy in this world as it evolves.
It's a great question. Again, obviously evolving kind of real time. And you're exactly right, which is brand traditionally, we measured more through survey methodologies, right? To understand were we impacting favorability and consideration and preference. And increasingly we've moved to more of an econometric model. So we're now, ideally trying to model more of that impact and attribute it back to business outcomes. But again, it could be, to your point, it's not the same as driving to a click. And therefore, we really have to measure all the way through the funnel, right, as much as we can. And some of that ends up being patching together these different measurement methodologies, which again is challenging because there is no one perfect methodology yet or set of measurement tools that are available. And so it is patching together our own MTA, right, as well as the econometric model that we have and piecing that together. And so to your point, I think we feel very comfortable that we, more than historically, have been able to ascribe more of an economic return on investment to our brand spend. But it's always in conjunction with, right, the lower funnel activities that we're driving and trying, again, back to optimizing this mix. So you're optimizing by audience and by channel and by message, but you're optimizing obviously for return on investment as well. And, all of that kind of gets put into a big stew. And, I think you still come out with, if you're lucky, a good 50-50 science and art to that. I think we're getting better at that and certainly feel a lot better about the ability to measure. I still think that, to your point, the cross-device measurement is where I think as an industry we still struggle, right? And being really able to be crisp, clear, and definitive about attribution every touch is still insufficient, I think, for making the best decisions.
Yeah. Okay. Before we shift to questions from the group, I'll come back to sort of a TV-centric question. Much is being made around the upfront dynamic, the traditional television upfront season and the broadcast year potentially moving to a calendar year. And I think we would all agree that traditionally speaking, the upfront dynamic for major national brands such as Wells doesn't necessarily provide the greatest fluidity or flexibility. And we hear often from brands saying, hey, I have trouble figuring out the next 4 weeks and this dynamic, not the next 4 quarters. So I think the environment that we're in today with COVID is putting increasing premium on the need for fluidity and flexibility of spend. And speak a little bit to that dynamic as you think about going into the market where you want to preserve tentpole events, whether it's the NBA playoffs or something else, making it up, and the need to be able to be more dynamic in your reaction to marketplace conditions and how you see that potentially unfolding.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And as you point out, I mean, we would certainly be happy with more of a movement to annual, right, calendar. I think that creative had always driven the nature of that, and that is evolving now. And so I think we do feel better about moving to more of a calendar basis. That said, I think that flexibility, as you've said, no one has ever experienced the kind of volatility that we've experienced over the last 6 months in terms of being able to predict anything about, right, this market. And so I do believe that hopefully in the upfronts going forward, there will be more flexibility built in because there has to be, right? And to your point, we as a consumer will certainly demand that because we have to. Because to your point, you don't know, especially as you think about just what's happened with the NBA and with Major League Baseball, right? With any of the kind of event-driven media, it's almost impossible. Programming is almost impossible right now to predict. And so for us, one of the things we will lean heavy into, which we have traditionally, is partnerships. Because we find that when we get engaged in a partnership, and Disney's a great example for us, we do with this food bank, we're doing a lot with Good Morning America and the other Disney properties, is what we find is there's a lot more flexibility inherent in that, right? Because we can work across all of their different opportunities. And so I think for us, leaning more into partnerships, and then as you said, really being able to negotiate upfront some element of flexibility given the volatility in the market. And I think it's just that it's going to have to find that equilibrium, right, for all of the advertisers right now, because there is so much unpredictability. And to your point, we're lucky if we can forecast 4 weeks out right now.
Yeah. Sort of piggybacking, Jamie, a little bit on that theme. As we bring more data to the marketplace and you think about integrated video strategy across screen, there's this inherent struggle between audience and context, and speak a little bit to that dynamic of, hey, do we move to all audience-based? Let's say we move to an addressable solution,
right,
where we can deliver that homeowner, as you described, with a mortgage that's 5 years in and X dollar value of the household, and we deliver that audience wherever we can find them. And that's a strategy versus how that sits inside the dynamic of also wanting to be in the right content,
right,
and sort of speak a little bit to the balance of audience targeting and contextual content targeting.
Yeah, and I think as we talked about earlier, it really has to be the marriage of those two. I think, for us, advertising always will be kind of a game of scale, right? And it gives us that broader opportunity. And to your point, there are the broader demographic reach is critical. And sometimes that's the most important thing, right? But then the audience base, as you said, addressable when it makes sense, right, is a great complement to that. And so it really does vary by business, by message, by segment, in terms of how we deploy those and in what percentage. And so I think they will always both have a role to play. I mean, to be honest, even if you said we think we can do addressable in 100% of what we do, I think there will. I think we would always want to be more also available, accessing broader demographics. And we would choose to do that where it makes sense. And so I think it's always going to be a blend of those two. And I think the good news is that the industry is getting more and more sophisticated so that you can make those choices better, but there's still choices, right? There's still going to be the ability to do one or the other or both as it makes sense.
Well, I guess it gets back to what a phrase you used previously about this balancing art and science, right? There's a science to it, and yet there's still an art to it as well. And how do we get to a good balance as we think about that? And we see some brands that get paralyzed by data and aren't able to act, and then others that may be more progressive from a contextual standpoint. So,
yeah, I think what's helped us in that, to be honest with you, is our business is processing, literally, right, unimaginable amounts of data. And so getting to, you're right, the paralysis that can occur is pretty significant, right? And if you're trying to move quickly and you're trying to optimize, Sometimes you're willing to trade off, right? And if we can get it 80% right, that's good enough, right? And we feel good about that. And I think we've gotten better. I think it's a bit of a mindset shift, though, especially for big companies who are used to being able to like measure and tick and tie everything. To be able to move quickly, you're going to have to trust a little more, right? And be comfortable with a little less accuracy sometimes. And I think COVID, again, was something that taught us that, which is like speed was critical. And even though relevance was also critical, maybe it didn't have to be as one-to-one personalized. A great example is we had to actually just create landing pages for all the states because we weren't able to update real time through any mechanism all the changes that were happening in local markets around businesses being open or businesses being closed and what the protocol was. And so we had to that was an example, we had to settle for like an 80% solution that wasn't as perfect as it could be because we knew the data was out there to be more perfect, but could be in the market quickly. We could be in the market in 24 hours with information versus having maybe slightly better information 36 hours later, right? So a good trade-off.
How, as you speak to that, Jamie, I'm curious, you think of a large bank, right? And the need to innovate and be dynamic in real time and not let perfection get in the way of progress. And to your point of, hey, listen, how culturally has that been a part of the Wells Fargo DNA? Is that something that's evolved in light of the challenges you face over this last several years? Has it been accelerated in light of the last several months? Give me a flavor for your sort of appetite to lean in with partners to sort of help shape the future, recognizing that it may be messy and may not be perfect in day one.
It's changed a lot. And I think what has changed is the realization that two things, right? One is that in the marketplace, people have some tolerance, not wide, but some tolerance for imperfection if they're getting to get access to something relevant and meaningful to them. And so it used to be that, we're in banking, we're handling people's money, we're caring for their personal future. And so we had, I think appropriately, a mindset of everything has to be 100% perfect all the time. And I wouldn't say it's that we tolerate imperfection, but I think we are very transparent with customers now when we say, hey, we're going to give you access to this and it's version 1.0, just like all the technology companies do. And we want your feedback and version 2.0 will be here in 3 months. And that was something we probably never would have done, right? A few years ago, but the market demands it. And to your point, we need to be in front of our customers more often in different ways. And they're very comfortable and willing to engage in that with us. And it took a little bit of give and take to do that. But I also think COVID, again, is a great example of where real time we learned that it was better to say, we don't have all the answers, but here's where we are, than to not say anything. And so that need for full transparency, full honesty and humility about what's going on is more important sometimes than perfection. And I think we've learned that the hard way through the last 4 years. And now we're able to apply it much more proactively as we get into new situations.
Yeah, that's great. Why don't we shift to some questions from the group for the last several minutes we have here. One of which sort of builds on the theme that you were just talking about in terms of as you face your customers and the tolerance for things not being perfectly formed. Speak to as you think about this evolving media landscape, speak to your relationship with your agency partners and how you create an environment where there is this dynamic, lean in, forward thinking, innovation, not quest for perfection. How do you sort of institutionalize that with your agency partners? How do you structure it on your side? Many agencies, their compensation models are rooted in sort of preserving the status quo in some respects. How do you break through that and really internally, not with the customers, but internally with your agency partners, begin to think about structure and sort of creating that culture?
Yeah, I think the cultural piece has been very important to us. And so one of the things we've done and have been doing now for some time is bringing in all the agencies much earlier on in the process, right? And so it's much more of a co-creation than it used to be. I think it was typically like, okay, here's your brief, and go and come back in 2 weeks and then right. And I think it's become, to your point, with media, with creative, with our diverse segments, what's been really, I think for us, a huge step forward is bringing in our diverse agencies way at the beginning. And it's often that some of our best work comes from that, either that co-creation or actually the insights that come out of our diverse agencies. And so bringing in the diversity, our traditional agencies, our media partners, and really having that be part of the campaign development way early on has made a really meaningful difference, because I think everyone is invested. We also move faster, right? There's less of a linear handoff process. It's more of an agile mindset, right? Which is, we're going to get in a room, we're going to create, and we divvy up work differently. Sometimes one agency takes the lead versus another. We're very flexible about that. And it's hard sometimes on agencies because they play a role. And so when you move roles around a little bit, sometimes that's like you move their cheese, right? But it's been really, our agencies have all stepped up to that. And we feel that we get incredible work. We get a lot of creativity, but we're moving faster, right? We're definitely moving faster. And to your point, there is skin on the game from all of them on being able to move faster, test and learn, right? And we help them with, accommodating that ability to test and learn. I think to your point, like when you hold somebody to sort of that high bar of perfection, there's less risk taking, right? In general. And when it's all about let's learn, which is our mindset, we've found tremendous receptivity from the agencies to that. And so we come into it as, look, we want 60 to 70% of this to be the workhorse, but the other 30%, let's get out there and learn. And it's been so fun to watch what comes out of that, right? Because, the creatives obviously love that, and that freedom to suddenly, and the media side does as well, is let's try something different and see what works.
Yeah, that's great. That's encouraging. I think it's no secret that our society is a rather divisive one at the moment. A lot of socially and economically divisive topics right now in the marketplace. Speak a little bit to how you navigate that, whether it's your traditional TV investment or digital investments, and being alongside content that may be sensitive, whether it's what we've seen recently coming out of the George Floyd tragedy, whether it's coronavirus. Speak a little bit to how you as a brand have had to navigate sort of the placement of the brand in this environment that is challenging.
Yeah, it is a great question. And I think it's not only about our customers, to be honest, it's about our employees. We have 260,000 employees, and our employees mirror the population of the United States. And so on any given cause, right, people are absolutely at both ends of that spectrum. And so where we show up certainly impacts our customers, but also impacts our employees. And, I will tell you, as we've navigated this, we always say this, that, we serve everybody. I mean, part of being a bank that serves 1 out of 3 Americans is we serve everybody. And so we have to show up where it's relevant and meaningful and important to show up. But that said, that we also have our own brand values that we have to adhere to. We do everything we can to make sure that we're showing up in ways that are appropriate and in places that are appropriate. And so, but it's not, and we know we will not always please everybody, right? So we try to have standards that we adhere to. We try to maintain consistency, because I think that's really important, and to be transparent about what we're doing. But we also have to acknowledge that, sometimes we will show up in places that people think is not appropriate. And we have to be able to articulate why we chose that, or why we are going to change our strategy going forward. But I think you hit on what is probably, I would say, almost bigger than a lot of the other things we talked about in terms of navigating going forward, is navigating kind of the essence of who you are as a company, and your purpose and your brand and your values, in a way that you can still serve everyone that you serve in a way that is appropriate and meaningful to them, is very challenging to navigate. And so you don't know what any one individual's preference is. Therefore, you have to, I've always said, and it's kind of a fun idea, that maybe one day, the way we're headed, there's going to be red banks and blue banks, right? Because there are actually people who really do want to affiliate everything in their life one way or another. But in the meantime, we serve both. And so we have to really be, whether it's an issue like George Floyd, we have to show our constituents, our stakeholders, and our employees, right, that we are the bank they want to bank with, and do it in as appropriate way as we can.
How many employees do you have, Wells Fargo?
We have about 260,000 employees.
260. A question that popped up is, in this environment, in this sort of working remote environment, how do you keep those 260,000 employees engaged, motivated, inspired, held accountable, all those things? How have you guys managed this transition from a residence working environment to this remote environment? Any insight you can share?
It's great. of our employees, 60,000 of our employees actually still are in offices, branches, right? We are in a essential business and serve customers. So we have an awful lot of our employees who we're very grateful for, who all throughout this have been coming into work every day to serve customers. So you take those out, the other 200,000 are working remotely. And so to your point, that's a lot of people to have working remotely. I will tell you, I think communication, you can't stress it enough, right? That ability to we shifted early on. It was hard with bandwidth, right? To be able to allow everybody to do Zoom or Skype. We've tried to shift as fast as we can to more video channels because people say they feel more connected when they can see their colleagues.
Yeah.
That was the single biggest thing we heard early on is I miss my colleagues. I miss my workplace for the social interaction. And so we found that doing virtual cocktail hours with your teams and having the ability to engage more, even one-on-one, face-to-face, is really helping people. It helps them feel connected, but it also gives them kind of it breaks up their day and makes it easier. So I would say communicate. You cannot over-index on communication. I think trying to inject also just more communication with different means of communication, right? We're doing more video. I do a video to my team just with my iPhone, right? Just, every few weeks just to touch base. And people have said they feel like they know me better than they ever have, right? Because it's personal and it's from my home. And I think that's I always think there's a silver lining to everything. And I think that is one of the silver linings to this is that we're learning how to connect in some ways more than we ever did when we sat in offices together.
Absolutely. I think the challenge of navigating that work-life balance for all of us, because I think, the commute from my bedroom to my desk is about 40 feet, whereas it used to be 60 miles. And that, taking down that barrier of work and life is a challenge for all of us as we navigate. Well, Jamie, as we wrap up here, one last question from the group here before we pass it back to Davina. As you think about a manager and your role leading and inspiring your team, what is the best advice that you've been given throughout your career that you're applying in these challenging days? And maybe the communication theme is one of it. But what's the best advice you've been given as a leader that you can share with the group?
Yeah, I think, the two things I would say are, one is to provide that vision. And I think that's true now more than ever. I think every time we get on a call, it's reminding everybody the role we're playing for our customers, right? How important it is, what we're doing, the work that we're doing. It's that mission and that purpose, I think, but it's also that North Star of remember what we're here to do and remember what we're striving to do. And then I think it's being authentic. I think that, if nothing else, I think to your point about separating home and work, you're suddenly seeing in a lot of leaders either all their authenticity or all their unauthenticity. And I think you're seeing that across brands as well. And I think that really being able to be both inspiring and authentic is a really great combination. And I think what I've learned a lot in the last 5 months is never more important, right? To inspire and lead, but do it in a way that is completely and 100% grounded in who you are as a leader, because everybody right now feels a sense of vulnerability. Our customers do, our communities do, and our individual employees do. And I think they want to know that whoever they're engaging with, whether it's their employer or their bank, is there for them in a very real and authentic way. So.
Well, that's a wonderful way to wrap up our chat this afternoon, Jamie. And I can't thank you again for taking the time out of, I know, is a very hectic schedule to share some thoughts with the group, and ending on an authentic note is a wonderful cap to the conversation. So
thank you, Ed. It's been great. Appreciate it.
Very much appreciated. So
thank you.
I think we'll turn it back over to Davina as we wrap up the session. Thanks again, Jamie.
Thank you.
Jamie had a huge fan following, lots of Wells folks, as well as some other brands watching. So great team, and thanks so much for the partnership. All right, so I think we're good for the day. We had a lot of really great speakers today. We've started with PayPal, Jill from PayPal and Venmo, and moved on to Barbara from John Hancock, over to Michael from Century 21, and then Taco Tuesday with Scott, and ending with Andrew and Jamie on Wells Fargo. So, and all the great work those guys have been doing. Thanks so much. Please join Brand Innovators tomorrow at 2:30 p.m. Eastern time for the sports and esports marketing topic. We'll be joined by marketing leaders from Nike and TrackSmith and many more. And thanks again, really appreciate all of